And so to give you a little overview, we have the hierarchy window on the left side. This lists all the items that are within our scene file, and our scene file is what is shown in the center view by default. And so if we click our camera, it'll select the camera and we'll see our camera in the scene view. If we select a light, it'll basically select and show us this light inside the scene view. We have the move controls, rotation, scale across the top here, as well as some pivot options and global rotation controls. And then on the right side, we have this inspector window. And this is a multi-purpose window. So this will change and show the components that are inside whatever item we have selected in the hierarchy. And so the camera view shows our camera component and the ability to change any of the elements within that. Light view then would show the light components. Down at the bottom, we have the assets window. Now, normally when you start up, you'll have a blank assets window. I've gone ahead and imported the AR Connect setup package from Unity, so we can bring that in and take a look at moving some geometry and sort of how that layout works. But in most cases, you'll have an empty folder, and this assets folder is the assets folder that is in your project. And so if you go to where you saved your project, you'll see an assets folder in there, and that works in conjunction with this assets menu item at the top. And so you can create assets within Unity, in this case a material, say, and so we'll just give it a name of red, and then you can change that particular item, and now you can use this asset in Unity. So if you were to create, if we go to the next tab over, the game objects, Unity is really not a modeling program, but it does have some primitive objects that you can create, as well as lights and audio and particles and things of that nature. And so you can go ahead and create a cube object. To zoom in on an object, you can simply double click it. It'll zoom right in. The Alt key on Windows or the Mac or the command and drag on a Mac will allow you to pivot around whatever item you have selected. And you can simply drag a material onto an object to assign that particular color to an object. And so if we look over at the components, we'll see that every component has this little menu. So you can reset the values if this came in case this one came in at 3 on the Y. If you want that to be 0, 0, 0, you can simply hit reset and then double click on it again, and we'll now have this in the very center of our world. And then every object effectively has this top level game object, which you can use the active or inactive state to turn it on and off. We use this quite a bit when we get into interactivity later. And every object has this transform component that basically controls and stores its position. And then we have, in this case, a mesh filter, which loads the cube object, which is built into Unity. If you were to import your geometry from another 3D package and bring it into the scene, it'll have a mesh filter where it loads your particular geometry. And then you have a mesh renderer, which basically controls the materials that are assigned to it and how it interacts with the lighting within the scene. And then if you don't, depending on how you create and import your content, you have the collider item. So if we turn off the mesh renderer, the collider item is basically just a object that will detect any collisions, and that could be your future user touching it, or it could be a dynamic collision that's set up within Unity. So this will actually then register and listen for those collision events, and that's how we use it to create interactivity, and we'll talk about that in an upcoming video. And any of these items have these little help drop downs, these little help buttons right next to them. And so you can click on any of these at any time. It'll take you directly to that particular component, and it just gives you a little bit of information about what that component does. And so that's a real handy learning tool to, if you come across a component that you're not sure what it is, you can get that information rather quickly. And then all the menus across the top, mainly it's the assets, the game object, and the components. These can all be accessed directly from these different panels. So if you right mouse click or command click on a Mac, you can get to this area where you add specific objects. If you use this drop down here, you can also get to that same menu. You can add a capsule. Let's just use the move tool to move that out of the way. And then if you are in the assets, create an asset area, or the import new asset or export package or import package, and we use these three quite a bit. You can get to those by right mouse clicking in the assets area and get to those same exact menu items. And then if you have an item selected, you can add a component either through this drop down up top or simply by adding the component here. So these three main menu items, are all accessible from within the user interface directly. When it gets into moving particular items, if we select our sphere, you have the move tools across the top here. The hand tool will basically move your view. So we're not really moving any objects, we're moving our view within the entire world. And again, double clicking an item will center that up for us. Middle mouse wheel will zoom in and out. And again, double clicking an item will zoom it back in to focus on that item. The move tool is very similar to any other 3D program. You have each axis as an arrow that you can control the movement of a particular item. Selecting an item is simply selecting it either by clicking on it in the hierarchy or clicking on it in the scene view. When we go to rotate, we get 3 axes that we can roll over. Each axis, it'll turn yellow, and that allows us to rotate the item about that axis. Also, if you're in the transform component over on the inspector, you can drag on the axis itself and rotate that item just by dragging on the inspector. And you can also input the values that you want directly into the inspector. And then as far as scale goes, it's very similar. You can scale it on any of the 3 axes independently or all of it together. The rectangle tool, although it does actually scale here, it's really designed for 2D user interface panels, and we'll talk about that in a future video. And then you have the everything tool, I call it. I'm not sure what they call it. What do they call it? They call it the move, rotate, and scale selected object tool. It's the everything tool. It does movement, rotation, and scale all within a single tool interface. We don't have to worry about the custom editor tool. We don't have any right now. We have the center or pivot. And we're going to switch over real quick to the AR Connect setup scene. I'm just going to double click that to launch that scene, and I don't need to save this scene here. So here we are in the AR Connect setup scene, and I have a piece of geometry just to show how this pivot tool does work. We have this prefab, which is basically a collection of child items under a null empty game object. That's how we create our experiences. And you'll notice if we toggle the pivot point between center and pivot, it changes how the rotation is handled. And so through center, it'll rotate this about the center of the object. But you might want to have this set to pivot, because that will then rotate it based on the pivot point of the object. And so this object came in sitting on the floor, so it's the 0, 0 point is at the very bottom. So this pivot and center are handy when you want to rotate or move something. And then the same with global rotation versus local. The local rotation will set the rotation and movement controls, the scale as well, based upon its original orientation. And then the world coordinate or global coordinate will set these rotation controls based upon world space. And so you'll notice that there's a difference in how these objects are rotated based on controlling these two toggles. And you can reset an object back to its origin by hitting the reset here. And so this is how Hercules came in originally. And we want to scale that up based off its pivot at the bottom. And in our modeling package, it put it basically facing the opposite direction. So we can simply rotate that back into where we want it. And so the next tab, and that bit pretty much covers the rotations. And we've talked about the main elements up here in the user interface. The one item that we did not discuss is window dropdown. We already have it installed. It's called the Asset Bundle Browser. But the first time you run Unity, you'll load up the package manager and you'll find the Asset Bundle Browser and go ahead and click install for that. And this is what we'll then use to save our prefabs as asset bundles that are specific to the Android and iOS platforms. And so there's a number of 3D libraries and packages, and if you're writing custom code and building out mobile applications, you would have a lot of these different packages installed, but we've extrapolated all the code from the equations so that all we need is this one package that'll help us to save as. And let's see what else. The Asset Bundle Browser itself, we can take a quick look at that. This is the prefab that is basically stored here, and we've saved it out as an asset bundle. And so what the asset bundle will do is it'll take this prefab, all of the children and the dependencies for all the children of it, and allow us to save that out as Android and iOS. And we look at that in the next video. And then also any items that we import, in this case we'll go back to the Hercules model. The import settings for this particular model are displayed in the inspector window. So not only does it show all the settings for what's in your scene, but anything that is imported will have the import settings for that particular model. If you have an image, it'll have the image import settings for the texture. Most of these are always fine by their defaults. If you have a model selected, you have the ability to extract your embedded materials and parse out any animations that are within your model so that you can interactively set up controls to display those later. And then if you're working in Maya or 3D Max, you can import your entire rig for a character and then be able to connect that to motion capture. So it's very versatile. And again, any of the settings, if you want to find out what these particular import settings are doing and how they work, the quick little help file will take you directly to those. So in the next video, we're going to look at how we basically created this from scratch, how we set up our size reference so we know what size our target is relevant to our geometry. And we're going to go ahead and create this one from scratch and upload and save out an asset bundle that we'll upload to AR Connects, and then we'll look at it live. So we'll see you in that next video.